It's the middle of the night, and the air is sharp enough to bite. Smoke drifts up from the fire and catches in the torchlight along the courtyard wall. A servant girl has built up a fire in the middle of an open courtyard, and a handful of men are standing around it, rubbing their hands, watching the flames instead of watching each other. One of them is a fisherman named Peter. A few hours earlier, at a table with the same man he's about to deny, he told him he would die before he denied him. That man is inside, on trial, and Peter is out here in the cold, hoping nobody looks at him too closely. Someone does. A servant girl studies his face in the firelight and says the thing he's been dreading. You were with him too. And before Peter can stop himself, the word is already out of his mouth. Woman, I don't know him. It happens twice more. A relative of the man whose ear Peter cut off in the garden. A bystander who recognizes his accent. Each denial comes faster than the last, sharper, until the third time Peter isn't just denying, he's cursing to make it convincing. And that is the exact moment a rooster crows somewhere out in the dark. Luke's gospel records what happens next in a single sentence, and if you read past it too quickly, you miss the whole story. The Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter went out and wept bitterly. Not a rebuke shouted across the courtyard, not a lecture. Just a look, in the middle of the worst thing Peter has ever done. And it breaks him open. Hold on to that fire. There's a second one coming later in this story, and it undoes everything that just happened around this one. But we're not there yet. Here's what most people miss when they read stories like this one. We tend to assume there's an order to how this works. Mess up, feel bad enough about it, clean yourself up, and only then does God let you back in the room. Confession first, closeness second. It feels fair. It feels like the way trust is supposed to work anywhere else in your life. This is not a story about waiting to be clean. This is not a story about proving you're sorry enough. This is not a story about how far you have to crawl before someone will finally look at you again. This is a story about what Jesus actually does. The instant shame freezes a person in place, and the order is not what you'd expect. You probably think of shame as just a feeling, something you carry for a while and eventually shake off. The Bible already had a word for it, long before psychology gave us a vocabulary for our insides. In Hebrew, the word is basheth. It doesn't describe an emotion, it describes a condition. Basheth is what happens when you're exposed, uncovered, pulled out into the light with nothing left to stand behind. Under that definition, shame isn't a bad mood. It's the ground disappearing from under your feet. Every person you're about to meet in this video is standing on that kind of ground, exposed, uncovered, without anything solid left underneath them. And in every single case, watch closely what Jesus does before they've said a single word in their own defense, before they've made a single move to fix what's wrong. It happens so fast and so consistently that if you blink, you'll read right past it the same way most people do. Start with a man nobody in his town wanted anywhere near them. His name was Zacchaeus, and he ran the tax collection for an entire region under Roman occupation, which meant he grew rich by squeezing his own people on behalf of the empire that occupied them. He wasn't just disliked. He was the kind of man a crowd would close ranks against, the kind of man mothers pointed out to their children as a warning. He wasn't invited to weddings. He wasn't asked to sit near anyone at the synagogue who had a choice in the matter. And on this particular day, when Jesus passes through Jericho with a crowd pressing in from every side, that same crowd does exactly what it always does to Zacchaeus. It closes him out. Zacchaeus, who the text goes out of its way to tell us was short, can't see over anyone's shoulders, and nobody in that crowd is inclined to make room for him. So he does something no grown man with any social standing left to protect would ever do. He runs ahead, in his expensive clothes, in front of people who already despise him, and climbs a tree like a boy half his age, just to catch a glimpse. He isn't trying to meet Jesus. He's trying to see him from a safe distance, the way you'd watch something from behind glass. And that's when Jesus stops directly under the branch, looks up, and speaks first. Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house. Not come down so we can talk about your sin. Not come down once you've made things right. Jesus invites himself into the house of the most hated man in town before Zacchaeus has repaid a single coin, before he's said a word of confession, before anyone knows whether he's actually going to change. The crowd notices immediately, and they are not quiet about their disapproval. He has gone into lodge with a man who is a sinner. That's the reaction of people who assume the order works the way you'd expect it to. Clean up first, get invited second. And Jesus, sitting at Zacchaeus' table, says the thing that reframes the whole encounter. Today salvation has come to this house, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. Notice the sequence. The seeking happens first. The saving happens in the middle of dinner, at a table Zacchaeus never expected to be sitting at with anyone who mattered, let alone with him. Zacchaeus doesn't climb down from that tree a changed man. He climbs down a curious one, still short, still despised, still guilty of everything the crowd is whispering about. The change happens after Jesus is already inside his house. Nearness comes first. It's not the reward, it's the door. And if you think that's a one-time exception, stay with me, because the next story is even harder to explain away. But it gets stranger, because at least Zacchaeus got an invitation, something extended toward him. The next woman you're about to meet never gets one. She has to take what she needs before anyone offers it to her. For 12 years, she has been bleeding. Not a wound, not an injury, but a chronic condition that never stops. And under the purity laws of her culture, that means something far heavier than physical weakness. Jewish law from this period, laid out in detail in texts like the Mishnah, treated a woman with a chronic blood flow as ritually unclean. And that uncleanness was understood to spread through touch. Whatever she touched became unclean. Whoever touched her became unclean. That meant 12 years without the ordinary contact most people never think twice about. No embrace from a friend without passing on the impurity. No sitting where others might sit later. 12 years of being someone people quietly stepped around in the marketplace, redirected their children away from, kept at arm's length without ever having to say why out loud. 12 years of spending, as the text tells us plainly, everything she had on physicians who couldn't fix her. She isn't just sick. She is, by the standards of everyone around her, contagious. You know what that kind of exhaustion does to a person after long enough? Not the sickness itself, but the slow erosion of ever expecting anything to be different. So when she hears that Jesus is passing through, surrounded by a crowd pressing in from every direction, she doesn't walk up and ask for help. She can't. Touching a rabbi in public in her condition would be scandalous, maybe even punishable. So she does the only thing available to a woman who has run out of options and out of standing. She reaches. Having heard the things concerning Jesus, having come up behind him in the crowd, she touched his clothes. For she said, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be made well." She isn't asking permission. She's betting everything on a single unauthorized touch from behind, where no one will see her face. You've probably done a version of this yourself on a much smaller scale, sent the message you were sure you shouldn't send, asked the favor you'd already decided you didn't deserve, because waiting for permission felt like it would take longer than you could stand. That's the same math, just with higher stakes. And it works. Immediately, the source of her bleeding dries up, and she feels in her body that she is healed of her affliction. For a moment, she thinks she can disappear back into the crowd undetected. Jesus doesn't let her. He stops. He asks who touched him, which sounds almost absurd, given how many people are pressing against him from every side. But he knows the difference between being jostled and being reached for. And now the woman has a choice. Stay hidden and keep the healing, or step forward and risk everything by admitting what she just did. The woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had been done to her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. That's the moment shame usually wins. That's the moment most people, having gotten away with something, would rather vanish than confess it publicly, in front of a crowd that already has reasons to look down on her. But she tells him everything. And Jesus' answer isn't a rebuke for touching him without asking. It isn't even really about the illness at all. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be cured of your disease." Daughter, not unclean woman, not the one who touched me without asking, a name that belongs inside a family. And there's something hiding in the original language here that most translations flatten out. The phrase "made you well" comes from the Greek word sozo, and sozo is the exact same word used everywhere else in the New Testament for saved. Not a related word, the same word. In the language the gospel was written in, her healing and her salvation are not two separate things happening at once. They're one word doing two jobs. Notice again the order. She reaches before she's given permission. Jesus responds before she's confessed a single word. The confession comes after the healing has already started, not before it. Now here's a harder version of the same pattern, because this next woman isn't hiding from a crowd. She's been dragged into the middle of one. The religious leaders bring her before Jesus in the temple courts, having caught her, they claim, in the act of adultery, and they make sure the confrontation happens in the most public place available, in front of a crowd that's already gathered to hear Jesus teach. They don't bring her because they care about the law or even about her. They bring her as bait, a human trap, betting that Jesus will either contradict Moses by letting her go or contradict his own reputation for mercy by condemning her. Either answer in their minds hands them something to use against him. Under that law, the penalty for what she's accused of is death by stoning, and the men holding the stones are standing right there ready, watching to see which way this goes. Jesus doesn't answer them directly. He bends down and writes something in the dirt with his finger. The only time in the entire Bible we're told he wrote anything at all, and the text never tells us what. Then he stands up and says the sentence that has ended more arguments than almost any other line he ever spoke. "He who is without sin among you, let him throw the first stone at her." One by one, starting with the oldest, they walk away. You can picture the sound of stones dropping one at a time onto packed dirt, until it's just the woman, standing alone in front of the one man in the crowd who actually has the right to condemn her. Jesus stands up and looks around at a courtyard that moments ago was full of men ready to execute her. "Woman, where are your accusers? Did no one condemn you?" "No one, Lord, neither do I condemn you. Go your way. From now on, sin no more." There's a word buried in that sentence that's worth pulling out into the light. Condemn in the original Greek is katakrino, and it literally means to judge down against someone, to pronounce a verdict that crushes them under its weight. Jesus doesn't say she's innocent. He doesn't pretend the accusation was false. He simply refuses to add his weight to a crushing that everyone else in the courtyard had already lined up to deliver. And notice exactly where the instruction to change lands in that sentence. Not first, last. "Go and sin no more" comes after. "Neither do I condemn you," not before it, not as a condition for it. This is not permission to keep doing whatever you want. This is not Jesus pretending the accusation didn't matter. This is not a story about the law being wrong. This is the same order you've now watched 3 times in a row. Nearness comes first, and whatever change follows grows out of that nearness instead of earning it. If that pattern is starting to feel less like a coincidence and more like something Jesus does on purpose, stay with me, because the next story might be the clearest example in this entire video. And if you've made it this far, go ahead and drop a comment with which of these stories has hit you hardest so far. I read everyone. There's a respected religious teacher named Simon who invites Jesus to dinner. That alone should tell you Simon considers himself in good enough standing to host a rabbi at his own table. Partway through the meal, an uninvited guest walks in, a woman the whole town knows by reputation, and not the kind of reputation anyone wants. She doesn't say a word. She simply comes and stands behind Jesus at his feet and begins to weep. And standing behind at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and she wiped them with the hair of her head, kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. In that culture, a woman letting down her hair in public, in front of men, was itself a kind of scandal, something reserved for the privacy of her own home. She does it anyway, kneeling on the floor of a house she wasn't invited into, using her tears and her hair and a jar of perfume that likely cost more than she could easily afford, while the other guests recline at the table, pretending not to stare. Simon watches all of this happen at his own table and says nothing out loud, but the text tells us exactly what he's thinking. If Jesus were really a prophet, he'd know what kind of woman this is touching him, and he wouldn't allow it. It's a small, silent verdict, delivered without a single word spoken. The kind of judgment that never has to justify itself out loud, because everyone in the room already agrees with it. Jesus, who apparently can read a silent judgment as easily as a spoken one, tells Simon a short story instead of arguing with him directly. 2 men owe money to the same lender. One owes a small amount easily paid off in a few weeks of ordinary wages. The other owes far more than he could ever repay in a lifetime, a debt heavy enough to follow him and his family for years. The lender looks at both of them and forgives both debts completely. On the spot, no repayment required from either one. Which of the two, Jesus asks, will love the lender more? The obvious answer is the one who owed more. You already know this feeling on a smaller scale, even if you've never thought about it this way. Forgetting a $5 debt between friends barely registers. But having someone quietly pay off something that was about to sink you, you don't forget who did that. You love them differently. Jesus turns from Simon to the woman still kneeling at his feet. Her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. And then, to her directly, The same words spoken to the woman with the bleeding disorder, almost word for word. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Watch what just happened at that table. Simon, the respectable one, the clean one, the one with nothing publicly wrong with him, never gets close to Jesus at all. He stays exactly where he started, arms folded, judgment intact. The woman with the reputation the whole town gossiped about is the one Jesus turns toward, forgives, and sends away in peace. Respectability didn't buy Simon anything that night. And disgrace didn't cost the woman what you'd expect it to cost her. Every story so far has happened in front of witnesses, a crowd, a dinner table, a courtyard full of onlookers. This next one happens at noon, in the heat of the day, at a well outside a town called Sychar, dug generations earlier by the patriarch Jacob, and still supplying water to everyone in the area. And the woman who walks up to that well has arranged her whole schedule around not being seen. Women in that culture typically drew water together, in groups in the cool of early morning or evening, when the work doubled as the day's social hour. This woman comes alone, at the hottest part of the day, when she can reasonably expect nobody else to be there. That timing alone tells you everything about how she's positioned herself in her own community. And sitting at the well waiting is a Jewish man who has no business speaking to her at all by the standards of the day. Jewish teachers didn't address Samaritan women in public. Ethnic tension between the two groups ran generations deep, and yet the first words out of his mouth are a simple request. Give me a drink. She's startled enough to say so out loud, and what follows is a longer conversation than Jesus has with almost anyone else in the Gospels. He tells her about water that satisfies permanently, not the kind she has, to keep hauling up from this well every day of her life. She steers the conversation towards safer ground, a theological dispute about which mountain is the correct place to worship, the kind of debate that lets two strangers avoid talking about anything personal. Jesus lets her have the detour for a moment, tells her true worship isn't about the right mountain at all, but about honesty before God. And then, without warning, without her bringing it up, he says the thing she came at noon specifically to avoid anyone knowing. You have had 5 husbands, and he whom you now have is not your husband. This you have said truly. 5 failed marriages and a 6th relationship outside of marriage in a small town is not a private fact. It's the kind of history that follows you to a well at noon because you've already calculated exactly who avoids you in the morning. And here's what should stop you cold. Jesus doesn't lead with that information to shame her into silence. He doesn't even bring it up as an accusation. He simply knows it, states it plainly, and keeps talking to her like a person worth a real conversation. Here's the part nobody tells you about what happens next. She doesn't shrink back into hiding, the way you might expect from someone who's just had her most avoided secret spoken out loud by a stranger. She does the opposite. She leaves her water jar sitting right there at the well, the whole reason she came in the first place, and runs back into the town she's been avoiding. Come, see a man who told me everything that I did. Can this be the Christ? The exact thing she has spent years hiding from her neighbors becomes, within minutes, the headline she runs to tell them. Think about how strange that is. Usually the thing someone knows about you that you're most afraid of becomes a weapon they hold over you, or a secret you guard even tighter. For her, the moment someone finally says it out loud without flinching, without walking away, is the moment it stops having power over her. Being fully known by the one person who didn't punish her for it turns out to be the thing that sets her free to be seen by everyone else. Now watch what happens with 2 more men, both of whom start this story hiding in a very literal sense, and both of whom take much longer than the woman at the well to come into the open. The first is a ruler among the Jews named Nicodemus, a respected member of the religious council, and he comes to see Jesus at night. The same came to him by night and said to him, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God." Night matters here. Nicodemus isn't casually curious. He's a man with a public reputation to protect, a seat on a council that decided who counted as faithful and who didn't, and being seen walking into a conversation with Jesus in broad daylight could cost him his standing among his peers overnight. So he waits until the streets are empty, comes under cover of darkness, asks his real questions in private, and disappears back into his respectable life before sunrise, as if the conversation never happened at all. The second man is Joseph of Arimathea, and the Gospel of John describes him in a single, blunt phrase. A disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews. Secretly, for fear. 2 men, both convinced, both following, both too afraid of what it would cost them to say so out loud. And Jesus never forces either of them into the open. He lets them come by night. He lets them stay quiet. Their nearness to him was real long before their courage caught up to it. Pay attention to this, because if you're moving quickly through this story, it's easy to miss what happens to Nicodemus and Joseph once Jesus is gone. Everything changes at the cross. This is exactly the moment when following Jesus stopped being a private conviction and started being a dangerous public liability. His followers scatter. Peter, who you already watched deny him 3 times, is nowhere near the execution. Most of the men who spent 3 years walking beside Jesus are in hiding. And this is the precise moment the 2 secret disciples finally step into the open. Joseph of Arimathea, the man who followed secretly for fear of the Jews, walks directly up to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who just ordered the execution, and asks for the body. Not from a distance, not through an intermediary. He puts his own name and his own reputation in front of the most powerful man in the region, at the exact moment it is least safe to be associated with Jesus of Nazareth in any way. And Nicodemus, the man who once came only at night, comes now in broad daylight. Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 Roman pounds. 100 Roman pounds of burial spices is not a modest gift. It's the kind of purchase a wealthy man makes when he no longer cares who notices him making it. The 2 men who spent their entire relationship with Jesus hiding finally go public at the one moment when going public gains them absolutely nothing. No reward, no safety, no public praise. Just a dead man's body and their own names now permanently tied to his. If you're keeping count, that's 6 people so far in this video, all frozen by some version of the same thing, and all of them reached by Jesus or moved to act before their situation looks safe or resolved. But there's one more name that belongs in this story, and it's the hardest one to talk about, because on the surface, it looks like it breaks everything you've just watched. His name is Judas, and he's been one of the 12 since the beginning, walking the same roads, eating at the same table, present for every story you've just heard. After he hands Jesus over to the religious leaders for 30 pieces of silver, arranged in advance, agreed to in secret, something happens that most retellings skip past entirely. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't disappear into the money he was promised. When he sees that Jesus has actually been condemned, that this wasn't going to end the way he must have told himself it would, the text says he is filled with remorse. I have sinned in that I betrayed innocent blood. Read that sentence again. That is not the language of a man who feels nothing. That is genuine, specific, verbalized guilt, spoken out loud, admitted plainly. You've probably felt some version of this yourself. The moment guilt stops being a vague weight and becomes a sentence you can actually say. In terms of raw emotional content, it isn't so different from Peter weeping bitterly by that first fire. Same weight of guilt. Same word, almost, for what they've done. So here's the question worth sitting with honestly. If nearness comes before cleanup every single time, why doesn't this story end the same way the others do? Why doesn't Judas get a beach and a breakfast instead of a rope? Look closely at where he takes his confession. He doesn't go back to Jesus. He goes back to the priests, the very men who orchestrated the arrest in the first place. Men who had no authority to forgive anyone of anything and no interest in trying. What is that to us, they tell him. You see to it. And that's the whole tragedy in one line. Judas took his guilt to a courtroom that could only ever hand down a verdict, never a pardon. And then, with nowhere left to carry it, and no one left willing to carry it with him, he cut off every remaining path back toward the one person who actually could have met him in it. Peter, weeping in the dark after his own denial, doesn't go looking for a religious court either. He doesn't try to fix it himself. He simply goes back to what he knows, back to Galilee, back to his boats, and his nets, still ashamed, still unresolved, but still somewhere Jesus knows exactly where to find him. You can hide from a crowd. It's much harder to hide from someone who already knows where you keep your boat. Before we get to the last fire, if any part of this has felt like it was describing something closer to home than you expected, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this kind of digging into scripture ahead, and this next scene might be the one that ties every other story in this video together. After everything, after the trial, after the cross, after the empty tomb that nobody in his group could quite explain yet, Peter does the only thing that still makes sense to him. He goes back to what he knew before any of this started. He goes fishing. He's out on the water with a few of the others, An entire night with nothing to show for it. When a figure on the shore in the early morning light calls out and tells them where to cast the net, it's Jesus. And once Peter realizes it, he doesn't wait for the boat to reach shore. Doesn't wait to think through what he's going to say to the man he denied 3 times. He just jumps into the water and swims, soaked and out of breath, toward the one conversation he's probably been dreading since the rooster crowed. When he reaches the shore, there's already a fire waiting, and for a moment nobody says anything at all. The other disciples are still hauling in the boat, and the net full of fish. Peter is standing there dripping, and Jesus is simply tending a fire like none of it needs to be rushed. As soon as they got out on the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. A charcoal fire. The exact same kind of fire Peter stood beside the night he denied even knowing Jesus, warming his hands while he lied 3 times into the dark. Now here's another one, built by the same man Peter denied, with breakfast cooking on it. If you've been tracking that first fire since the opening of this video, this is where it comes back around. After they eat, Jesus turns to Peter and asks him a question. Not once, 3 times. Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? 3 questions for 3 denials. And by the 3rd time, the text tells us Peter is hurt that Jesus keeps asking. But notice what Jesus does with each answer. He doesn't lecture Peter about the courtyard. He doesn't make him relive the specifics of what he said or who he said it to. He simply asks the same question the failure already answered in the negative, and lets Peter answer it again, out loud, in front of witnesses, standing in the daylight this time, instead of hiding in the dark. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep. That's it. No formal ceremony, no waiting period. The man who cursed and denied him 3 separate times on the same night is handed the exact same job he had before any of it happened. Feed my sheep. Not prove yourself first. Not earn this back over time. The nearness Peter thought he'd burned down to ash by that first fire was still standing, fully intact, on the other side of a second one. You know that feeling, somewhere in the middle of the night, when you've rehearsed a confession so many times you can recite it from memory, softened it, rewritten it, tried to find some version of it that cost you less, certain that saying it out loud will end the relationship for good. And then you say it anyway, because staying silent has become worse than the risk of saying it. And the person on the other end doesn't hang up, doesn't even let you finish the sentence before they say, come over. That's not proof of anything theological. It's just the shape of the thing, the exact same shape, whether it happens over a phone at 3 in the morning or over a charcoal fire on a beach at sunrise. So here's where all of this actually lands. First, the plain truth about what you've just watched. In story after story, across characters as different as a tax collector, a bleeding woman, a woman dragged out for public execution, a secret follower, and a man who denied his closest friend 3 times, Jesus never once waits for someone to clean themselves up before he moves toward them. Not once. 9 stories, 1 order every time. Second, here's what that actually means for you. If you've been operating on the assumption that you have to fix yourself first, get your life in order, feel sorry enough, before you're allowed to come close, you've been running the order backward the whole time, maybe without ever noticing it. The nearness isn't the finish line you earn after doing the work. It's the starting point everything else grows out of, the ground you're already standing on before you've done a single thing to deserve it. And third, the part that should actually stay with you longest. The only person in this entire video who ends badly isn't the one with the worst sin, and it isn't the one who took the longest to come clean. Judas and Peter did almost the identical thing that same week, betrayal, denial, and identical remorse to go with it afterward. The difference was never how bad the failure was. The difference was where each man carried his guilt afterward, and whether he stayed close enough for it to actually be met. So here's a real question for you, and I actually want to know the answer. Of everyone in this video, Zacchaeus, the 2 women, the woman at the well, Nicodemus, Joseph, Peter, even Judas, which one felt the most like you and why? Tell me in the comments. There's a fire burning on a beach in this story, built by the same hands that were nailed to a cross 3 days earlier, cooking breakfast for the exact man who swore he never knew him. Remember that Hebrew word from the beginning, bosheth, the ground disappearing out from under you. Every person in this video stood on that same missing ground at some point, exposed, uncovered, certain there was nothing solid left to catch them. And every single time the ground turned out to be a person, standing closer than they thought, long before they'd done anything to deserve it. That's not a story about how far you have to walk to earn your way back. That's a story about someone already standing at the shore, fire lit, breakfast ready, before you've even started swimming.